You show up at your local gun range, maybe it's a place that you go often. You see that there's some new steel targets downrange, or maybe it's a new gun range where you've never been and there's targets downrange. The question is, how can you tell that those steel target systems are safe? And what steps can you take to ask the right questions to make sure that the steel that you're shooting isn't going to shoot you back? The reality is we get this question a lot. We get the question of, are steel targets safe all the time? And the answer to that question isn't quite as black and white as people would assume. Now, I can definitely answer the question that if you're using our steel target systems, yes, they're very safe. If you use them properly, proper ammunition, and the proper distances, it's a very safe shooting experience, and you're gonna get a lot of value out of using steel targets while you're training. But you can't answer yes to all steel target systems. There's a bunch of engineering that has gone into every single system that we offer in our entire lineup that makes these targets safe and gives you the ability to shoot without fear of having shrapnel and stuff raining back down on you. So guys, we're gonna walk down range here. I have a couple of our target systems today, and the goal of this video is to arm you guys with knowledge and information so that you can make really good choices while you're out shooting. Because the reality is a lot of these different gun clubs have a member on the board where they're a fabricator, maybe they have access to a scrap bin at their shop or their place of work. And more often than not, the steel that you're gonna get in a situation like that is not proper steel. It's not going to be safe, and it could potentially be life-threatening depending on the calibers and the distances that you're shooting. And I wanna take you guys back to last year because Sheepdog Defense Project shared a post where one of their followers was shooting with their pistol and engaged a target system, and it decided to shoot back. And what I mean by that is in the video you could clearly see they drew their gun, fired, and a piece of shrapnel just lodged into their leg. It was a really gruesome video. The person, from my understanding, is okay. Probably needed some stitches or things like that, but there was a piece of fragmentation stuck in their leg. And as soon as I saw that, I immediately shared it to our story, and I broke down the why behind what happened with that particular instance, because as soon as he showed the target system that he was using, I knew immediately why that fragmentation came back and hit him. And guys, this is a super serious topic, and it's one you have to take with the utmost urgency. You need to make sure that you're shooting the proper steel targets. And I know a lot of you are going to assume right away this is just a sales pitch. Jared's just trying to sell his systems because obviously we want to make money with our company. We want to scale up. We want to invest in new equipment and do all of this content for you guys, and buying these steel target systems and selling these is how we afford to do that kind of stuff and continue to put this content out for you guys. But the larger point of this video is, generally speaking, you show up at a range that you don't know the brand of the targets. How can you tell if they're safe? And I'm going to break this down for you today. It's pretty simple, but it's very important. So the first thing that you're going to notice here on our mini ADAP system, and this carries over to all of our systems, is a really high quality base. And the base is going to form the foundation of the system. I know some of you might roll your eyes at this point because you're saying, well, how can the base affect the safety of the system? And while I will admit that the base isn't the first aspect to the safety, it is the foundation of the system. So when we're talking about our 20-inch round base, there's a couple things that you're going to notice. The post itself is slid all the way to the back, and there's a reason for that. This is all about center of gravity. A lot of people like to comment that our systems are extremely stable, and it's because we've taken the time to think through these systems and create them in a way that they're not just going to fall over. And that's important because as steel targets fall over on a range with multiple shooters, if people are engaging those targets as they're collapsing or falling, you could potentially have erratic splatter patterns, and it could become a problem. But this base is the most popular base we offer. It also has tubes up front for furring strips. Again, that's not a safety aspect of this, but it does give a lot of extra value to the folks that are shooting. Super stable base, very important to a safe target system. And then as we go up, you can tell by this particular system that we have a 2x4 wood post. And this is important. So a lot of folks would ask, why do we have a 2x4 post? The first is it's an inexpensive way, good joke 2020, for people to have a post to hold up their system. And I'm joking because lumber prices went through the roof this last year, but it still is an inexpensive way to mount your target. And the other key aspect of a wooden post is the fragmentation will chip away at the board and embed. It won't bounce back. and that's super important. There's a couple target manufacturers on the market that what they do is make a mild steel post. And when I say mild steel, what that means is it has no hardening. It is just a soft steel. We would never use mild steel in a plate. But these companies will use mild steel in a post, and the problem with that is if you miss the target and you hit the post, it could create pockets. And those pockets, if you think about it like a crater, that's how fragmentation can come back to the shooter. And I'll jump into that as we talk about the plates. But if your target system has a mild steel post, it's a problem. And it could potentially become a safety hazard, especially if there's a lot of different craters on the upright of the post. Now, some folks right now are saying, well, you guys offer metal posts. And that's true. But we use an armored plate for those posts. They are not mild steel. And so that means if you happen to strike them, they're not going to crater and send fragmentation back to you. They're designed not as a target, but to capture stray rounds and deflect rather than create pockets and send fragmentation back to the shooter. So the post is an extremely important aspect of this target system. And the reason why is it holds the top bracket. And the top bracket itself is super important because this is the foundation for the upper portion of the target system. And if you have a good top bracket, a good design, it's going to allow the plate to do all of the things that it needs to do. So on our ADAP top brackets specifically, they position the plate over the center of gravity for the particular base. And if you're using our Goliath system and you're running it with a 26-inch base, we have a different top bracket for that versus, say, a mini ADAP like this with a 20-inch base. It's going to position it properly for the larger base. But on this particular top bracket and all of our ADAP systems, the key aspect of the attachment is the fact that one pin holds this entire system in place. And that leads us to one of the most critical aspects of this, and that's the target plate. So this is where I'm going to spend most of my time here explaining to you guys. The target plate itself and the material used can vary greatly from one manufacturer to another. And the way that I explain this to people is you can call a mill. You can purchase, say, AR 500 steel. You can just tell the mill I want 40,000 pounds of AR 500 plate. The problem with that is there's a variation. So all of these companies that are selling AR 500 steel are not telling you that there's a massive variation between a true spec AR 500. Some of the plate that they're going to get in is going to be in a Brinell hardness range of 425, 450. And that Brinell, that word Brinell, is referring to how hard this plate is. So the higher the number, the harder the plate. And there is a balance. If you go too hard, you could potentially get a very brittle plate that could fracture and have problems prematurely. Too soft, and you get those craters that I was talking about on the front of the plate. The craters are a major problem, but also if your target systems are so brittle that they crack immediately with use, that's also another major problem. So as these companies are offering you AR 500, most of them are not going to spec a minimum hardness. And because of that, you don't know if your plate is going to truly be AR 500 steel or if it's going to be a softer material. It's far more expensive to quote and price out and request materials that are either custom blend or a minimum hardness, which is what we do for all of our targets. And because of that, the companies aren't willing to increase that cost on the raw materials. You're getting a subpar product. So anytime you initially see someone offering an AR 500 target, immediately red flags would go up for me, and I would just pause for a second and say, okay, where are they getting this steel from? The next thing with that AR 500 steel, the problem with it is the fact that all these companies then require you to shoot at 100 yards or further. And the reason why is they're trying to create a margin, a buffer, so that if there are soft targets in existence, they're giving a further distance so that hopefully none of you guys get hit with fragmentation. So right off the bat, back in 2016, we phased out AR 500 steel altogether out of our target plates and moved right into a custom spec AR 550. And right from the beginning, when we order this material, it's spec'd to our custom hardness number. And we require that it meets that certain level of hardness to, one, be considered AR 550 steel, two, be accepted by our shop, and then we track heat and lot numbers for every single target plate that we sell, and we catalog them and keep them within our system so we can make sure that you guys have the proper quality control for your target systems. So by far, the type of steel that's used in the target plate is going to be the most important aspect as we're going forward with that. But then the other thing that you're going to notice, every single target system that we sell has a forward lean. And there's a reason for that, because when a bullet impacts steel, and I'll just hold this upright for a second, if a bullet were to impact a flat plate like this, it's still going to fragment. If it's quality steel, it's going to blow into thousands of pieces. The problem with this flat plate, you're putting all of that energy into one spot. So if there's no movement, there's no forward lean, this plate now needs to absorb every bit of that energy. The second problem with that is as that fragmentation happens, you're gonna get a 360-degree ring of fragmentation. Now, this is where I start to nerd out and I get really pumped up about this stuff because there's a lot of physics involved in targets. Think about if you skip a stone on the water. Anytime you skip a stone on the water, it never bounces straight back up. You can throw a ball at an angle at something and it's going to follow the plane of whatever you just hit, the surface or the floor or the ceiling, whatever. It's going to follow that plane within a certain degree. We did a ton of testing with high-speed cameras and found that the degree of deflection from fragmentation, so take that straight plate like this, that fragmentation can only come back toward the shooter at about a 12 to 15 degree angle. And so what that means is the myth of, okay, you shoot steel, and again, it has to be proper steel. When you shoot steel, there's a chance that fragmentation can come right back at you. And physics says no, that's not how this works. When we add a forward lean like this, we're now sending most of that fragmentation down to the ground. And I've done a bunch of examples and stories and different posts in the past where I took a ball, or I've thrown my keys before, I threw a flashlight. You can throw anything you want at one of these steel targets. You're never gonna get it to bounce back at you. You're always going to get it to deflect. Again, it may come back this direction at about 12 degrees, but that's the most that you're gonna get as far as deflection. And all of this stuff gets factored into our safe shooting distances and how we come up with our recommendations for how to shoot this stuff safely. So we've established that the forward lean is extremely critical. What about movement? And as you'll see with all of our target systems in the ADAP family, they also move when they're struck. So think about it, anything you would say punch. If you punched something and say it's a concrete wall and you punched it, all of that energy is going right into that wall. If there's some movement there, and also if you punch a concrete wall, you're probably gonna break your wrist, but if there's movement there, there's something to further absorb that energy. You're changing that energy from just impacting to now you're adding movement into the plate. You're transferring that energy to the plate. That doesn't really affect the fragmentation, but the reason why that is desirable in steel targets is because of absorbing that energy. So when you couple all of these traits together, you start to get a system that is truly remarkable. It's the most robust systems on the planet. And it takes all of those traits really to accomplish that. The other thing that I'll say about our ADAP system, almost everyone in the family of the ADAP targets, with the only exception being this mini vital zone over here, they all have adjustable lean angles. And the reason for that is certain departments require minimum degrees of lean to be able to safely engage on their range. And again, this target can be at the top bracket, which would be like that. It can be in the middle where it would be kind of like that lean, and here is about 40 degrees. They're all safe with our systems, but there's certain SOPs that exist from departments that have been in place for decades, and we're just meeting that requirement. The other thing, the downside of putting them at the steepest angle like this is it does distort a little bit of the view of the plate from the front. So depending on your needs, if you're shooting handguns and you're not shooting high caliber rifles, you really don't need to run it at the steepest lean. But what I will say is if you can run it at the steepest lean, it's pretty cool. We'll go back here then in a couple minutes, but it completely throws the fragmentation out of the way of the base. And the last thing I'm going to say about this particular family of systems and bases in general, a lot of companies with the base just like to throw together an H base out of angle iron. Some of them have a lot of flat edges that face you as a shooter, or they have angles that are angled improperly. And what can happen is secondary fragmentation can hit that base. If it has angles coming back toward you, could actually send fragmentation back to you. So the goal with the base is the maximum footprint with the smallest and thinnest material possible. And we created that balance with the round base, and we did that even further with the arachnid. And anytime that there is an exposed piece of armor like a plate, we tend to have a forward angle on that. And so the arachnid base is a good example. The ravens we'll talk about in a second. That's another good example of all of those angles deflecting fragmentation away from you. So there's a lot of engineering that goes into this stuff. It's not just throwing plates together, hanging them up on hooks and calling it a day. Those are just a couple things to keep in mind. And I'm gonna walk here to some brand new ravens that we just set out on the range the other day, because these differ in one key aspect. They don't have as much movement. And like I said, that's not the end all be all. If I could choose between having a forward lean and no movement or a straight plate with movement, I want this. This is okay. There's still movement when they're struck, and the ravens are at an extremely hard lean angle toward the front. The other aspect about the raven target is it's made of the same 3/8 AR-550 that all of our other target systems are made of. So again, we're crossing the box of, we have high grade steel that meets all of our minimum standards of hardness. We have no flat planes or anything in the way that are gonna send fragmentation back. The legs are even hardened plate. And the cool thing about the Raven is the fact that because it's so low to the ground, because everything's angled, there's a pretty wild splatter pattern that hits the ground. And because it's so close to the ground, it's really pronounced. It's very easy for us to show you guys how that splatter pattern looks. And this is super important as well, because if you guys don't know the brand and you don't know the makeup and you don't know anything behind the target system, I would typically recommend don't shoot it. But let's walk over here and I'm gonna show you this splatter pattern on the ground. And I'm a guy that likes visuals, so if I can show you guys with a visual, I think that there's benefit to that. These ravens have been here for a little bit of time. We move this stuff all around the range, but what you can see in the grass here is a perfect pattern. And this is where that fragmentation is going. And there's nothing sporadic about this fragmentation. Some people think that it's not consistent, or you use FMJ ammo and the fragmentation's going everywhere. The reality is, if you have checked the box of quality plate, you have forward lean, you have quality base and quality components, the fragmentation is actually extremely consistent. We can predict where this is going to go. And again, because of that aggressive lean, it's just jamming all that fragmentation down into the ground. The one thing that I'll note that you're never gonna get away from with steel targets is some of that side fragmentation. So if you guys would envision with me, if I put up cardboard right here, both sides of the target had a piece of cardboard here, and I shot it, you would see some of that fragmentation to the side. But because that fragmentation can never come straight back, so long as we have a smooth surface, it's quality plate, there's no craters, that fragmentation just cannot come back to you. As long as you're outside of that fan, you're never gonna get hit with fragmentation. The only exception to that is if your range has concrete floors or you shoot on a stone range, sometimes fragmentation hitting those targets can hit the stones, and that's how you can sometimes feel it coming back toward the shooters. So you do have some range considerations that you guys should consider. But that's the Raven target system, that's the fragmentation. Perfect example of what happens when we have a quality system. Let's take a walk over here to this mini ADAP, and I wanna show you guys what we're working with over here in this regard, because the mini ADAP and all of our ADAP family with the adjustable angles misses that base completely. Back here in the dirt, you can see how it's kind of peppered. There's a big spray pattern here. The reason why is because the mini ADAP has that movement. So as we're striking this plate and movement is happening, we're throwing all of that fragmentation back here behind the base altogether. And the 2x4 from the side actually shows that angle perfectly. You can see where it's chewed up. So the downside of the 2x4s is the fact that they're gonna get embedded with sharp fragmentation. So when you're handling these, you gotta be very careful. But as far as bang for your buck, The 2x4 works really good. It's super easy to replace. You can change the heights of it, very lightweight. It's just a consumable item. For folks that are training on larger ranges or have more shooters, we would just recommend using our armored post. So guys, before we even get to all of this point, we get to the point of producing or you guys are actually getting shipments, they're showing up at your door and you're opening your box with your new target. All of this starts off in our production facility. And the reality is we're taking steps that are far different than anybody else to make sure that what we're engineering and what we're producing is the highest quality target system that money can buy. Everything from raw material selection, how we cut and handle and form and fabricate, ultimately to the paint job that we apply to these target systems. We take quality steps to make sure that the product is as good as you can make out of the materials that we have in this world currently. And we're constantly looking for ways to further refine all of those products through the entire process. And then when we talk about QC, the quality control, we are tracking every single target plate. If you take a mini ADAT plate that you purchased at any point and you pop the angle off the back, behind that angle is a serial number that is tracking the hardness of the plate and when it was produced. And these are super important things to us because our values as a company and who we are as people means that we're going to produce a quality product that is unmatched by anybody else. But that's enough ranting and raving. Last thing I'm going to say is when you guys buy our 1/2-inch AR550, we do have a lifetime warranty on the plate, so you can also rest easy knowing that your money is spent with a company that has your back. All the welds and everything are always covered under warranty. If you have failures, things like that, just reach out to us and we will get you taken care of. Guys, there's a lot that goes into steel targets. It's not just hanging up plates. It's not just cutting junk steel from a bin at some shop. Make sure that you are taking the time to research. And what we did is actually throw together a little pamphlet for you. It's going to be free to download on our website. We'll put a link in the description, which will allow you to grade the target systems that are on your gun club's range. And if you're questioning whether or not they're safe, the best course of action is just don't shoot them. And I'm not saying that to try to push you guys to buy these systems. I don't care what system you buy, but make sure that you are auditing the system because it's your eyes and it's your life and nobody else is gonna pay your medical bills except for you. Make sure you're investing in quality stuff, guys. We appreciate you. See you in the next one.